Um, Thank you again for visiting and spending time with us today here, here on Zoom. It's wonderful to be able to all be together and to be able to connect across oceans and across many miles. And I'm gonna turn it over to Molly to get us started.
Thank you, Emily. I'm so pleased to be here with all of you. Welcome to everyone who's tuning in. It's really wonderful to have so many people here today to hear from this group of youth activists on the panel that I couldn't be more excited to host. I'm the director and producer of OBJECTOR, the documentary, which came out in 2019 and had a really surprising and wonderful reception around the world. This month, actually, after a very successful run in film festivals, OBJECTOR came out on Amazon Prime and Vimeo On Demand. So if you haven't seen it yet, that's okay. We'll be discussing lots of things beyond the film. And I can't wait to get to it. So I'm going to pass it back to Emily Siegel, Program Director of Eyewitness Palestine, who will be our moderator for today. Thanks for joining.
Thank you so much, Molly. And yeah, thanks for all of you for joining. I'm really excited about this panel today, and I feel really honored to have the panelists with us as well. I would like to begin by acknowledging the indigenous peoples of the land that we're on today, from Turtle Island, North America, to Palestine. While we meet today on a virtual platform, let's take a few minutes to think about the importance of the history and current struggles of the indigenous peoples of these lands. I hope that you'll take a minute to think about how this connects to where you currently reside. And if you aren't sure, we're going to be putting a resource into the chat where you can find out more. And once you navigate to this website and enter your address, you'll see a list of territories, and a number of links will appear to give you even more information. So we'd love for you to join us and go to that website, or if you already know yourself, enter into the chat the indigenous land that you are calling in from. I will say I'm calling from Anacostan and Piscataway territory, which is also known today as Washington, D.C. And I also want to note that the website we're looking at is ever expanding. It's a wonderful project. And the map does not yet include Palestine with more information. But one action you can think about taking after this discussion is to go to their contact page and request that it be added. So it's a great way to add Palestine to the map. You can also learn more specifically around Palestine and Israel through an amazing resource from Visualizing Palestine, and explore their map through another link that we're going to be putting, that we just put in the chat as well. And just as so many of us continue to decry and resist the ongoing Zionist settler colonialism of Palestine, so too must we remain alert and attuned to the processes of indigenous dispossession that continue to play a role all over the world. So I really thank you all for taking a little time with me today for this acknowledgement, and perhaps even learning a little bit more about where you currently are residing. So now let's turn to our discussion for today, which is being co-sponsored by 3 organizations: Eyewitness Palestine, which, as Molly said, I work with, and we are a transformational education program that inspires and trains participants to be accountable, lifelong social justice advocates in the Palestine Solidarity Movement and within their own communities. And our vision is a world where Palestine is liberated and all are free. We're also co-sponsoring with Jewish Voice for Peace, that seeks an end to the Israeli occupation of the West Bank, Gaza, and Gaza Strip and East Jerusalem, security and self-determination for Israelis and Palestinians, a just solution for Palestinian refugees, an end to violence against civilians, and peace and justice for all peoples of the Middle East. And then, of course, OBJECTOR, which if you haven't been able to see the film, it follows Atalya, who's here with us today, to prison and beyond, and offering a window into Palestine, Israel from a perspective of a young woman who seeks truth and takes a stand for justice. So like all Israeli youth, Atalya is obligated or was obligated to become a soldier. But unlike most, she questions the practices of her country's military and becomes determined to challenge this rite of passage. And the OBJECTOR Impact Project seeks to facilitate diverse audiences' engagement with the film's theme of feminism, anti-militarism, solidarity, and the power of youth leadership. And so that's where this panel comes in today, the power of youth leadership in a lot of ways, as well as anti-militarism and feminism and solidarity. So we're really excited to start this off today. And we are putting into the chat a couple of links to to these organizations and how you can get involved and get more information. And we'll circle back at the end a little bit more about how you can take action. So I'm really excited to be moderating this discussion today as the program director of Eyewitness Palestine, but also as a board member for the Refuser Solidarity Network, and someone whose academic research focused on the militarization of Israeli education and ways that justice and peace building and social change can be integrated into alternative education programs. So the theme today really brings together so many of my own passions and interests, and I'm excited to learn from our panelists today. So I do want to turn it over now to you all, the wonderful panelists, and maybe to just start, if you all could each introduce yourselves and let us know a little bit about what you are currently focusing on. So maybe we'll start with Atalya, but then we can jump around to the other panelists as well. And hopefully, yes, there you go.
Yes. Hi. Thank you all so much for joining us. I'm really excited to be here. So my name is Atalya Ben-Abba. I'm 23 and I currently live in Jerusalem. I'm a student of sociology and philosophy. And in 2017, I refused to enlist in the Israeli military, and I was imprisoned in the Israeli military for 110 days, and because I refused to take part in the apartheid regime that Israel has over Palestine. And yeah, now in Jerusalem, I'm still a part of different activist group, and a part of the Samba group, which is like a group of drummers who go to protests. And I'm a guide in a youth movement that's called Youth in Solidarity. And I'm also an active part of Mesavot, which is the refuser network that both Yael and I am a part of.
Great, thank you. And maybe Abed, we can jump to you.
Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Abed Abou Shehadeh. I'm a current city council member in Yafa, Tel Aviv municipality. And I did my MA in political science and political philosophy in Tel Aviv University. Most of my research focuses on the social and cultural segregation of the Palestinian community in Yafa, but not only in Yafa. I do focus primarily on Yafa. I'm also active in a party called Balad, which in a nutshell, a party that believes that the state should be a state of all its citizens and not just for one particular group. And Talia, it was very interesting watching your movie, very insightful. And thank you.
Thank you. And Yael, how about you go next, and then we'll jump right to Sami.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Yael. I'm 19. I'm originally from Tel Aviv, but I am now living in Jerusalem. I was a part of the group who wrote the 2021 Shministim letter, or high school seniors letter, which is basically an annual refusal letter. Other than that, I am currently doing my civil service, which is a civil substitute of military service, in the Jerusalem Bilingual School, which is a school that combines kids from both East and West Jerusalem. So I teach Hebrew and I mentor activist groups in East Jerusalem. And yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Good to have you with us, Yael. And Sami, last but definitely not least, if you could introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. This is Sami from the village of Twani, from the South Hebron Hills. I am 23 years old too, Talia. I'm really happy to be with you here in this event tonight. Very shortly about myself, I am a student of international law. Also, I am coordinator of a group of youth in the South Hebron Hills called Youth of Sumud. The youth group committed to the nonviolent resistance was born in 2017 to protect Palestinian village from confiscation by the Israeli settlements, to protect the Palestinian land in this area. And having different activity on the ground, organizing different activity on the ground, from like helping school children to reach school, accompanying the Palestinian shepherd with other international and Israeli, documenting the violation that the Palestinians, documenting the violation of the occupation against the Palestinian in the South Hebron Hills, and also our activity in other places in the West Bank. Sorry for the long, and I will stop here. We have a lot to talk about.
No, that was wonderful. I really appreciate it. And we know, I have lots of questions for all of you, but we do want to encourage the audience to enter your own questions into the chat, and we'll make sure to incorporate as many as possible into our discussion as well. And I hope that many of you who are participating today have been able to watch Objector, the film. And so what I wanted to do is maybe actually start with you, Atalya, to get things going, to just see what you think about how the struggle in the South Hebron Hills, where Sami just talked about being located, and the Jordan Valley informed your decision to refuse, and how you've continued that activism since being released from jail.
Yeah, that's a big question. So a few years back, before I refused, but after I decided, or even before I finally decided, I went with Tayush to a lot of activities in the Jordan Valley and South Hebron Hills. And it was very, very impactful for me, because you just see how unjust and cruel and just bad everything is. And I couldn't, seeing how much of a discrimination is there. I mean, with every basic human right. I mean, in the Jordan Valley, it's so hard for people to get access to water. So it's basically just, taking away basic human rights, hurting people just for being who they are. So I just seeing all that and meeting people and talking to people and creating relationships, it made my resolve stronger. And these days I've been going to the demonstrations in Atwani, and trying to take part in the activism, going there. yeah.
Thank you. No, that's wonderful. And I think that even in your intro, you talked a lot about all of the different organizing groups that you're a part of and, have been doing all of the work that you've been doing definitely since the movie came out and I saw you in DC. So really appreciate hearing that. I think now, Sami and Abed, I'd be interested to hear from you all what you all see as necessary to build true Israeli solidarity with Palestinians. How is that happening now? How is it not? And what else is needed? So I'll see either of you that want to respond. Please go for it. Sami, why don't you start us out?
I can start, yes. I would like to mention something. According to the area of the South Hebron Hills, it has since long time the relation with the Israelis and the Israeli who are supporting the resistance and the non-violent resistance in the South Hebron Hills, supporting the Palestinian here. I think it is very important, usually the Israeli presence to beside the Palestinian and the life that they are facing, as like not all the Israeli first of all represent the occupation, and as well into this is a strong position for the Palestinian and for the Israeli in the front of the world that not all the Israeli is representing the occupation. From this point, I would like to mention that, like for example, the Israeli activists who are supporting the Palestinians in the field, for example, accompanying the shepherd, they are as well under attack by the Israeli settlers and by the Israeli, and also under arrest by the Israeli soldiers because they choose to be by the side of the Palestinian, because the Palestinian is the victim of this occupation. And so the main goal that we are asking for, this is making really a big change and a lot of questions about why the Israeli settlers or the Israeli army are arresting this Israeli. So this is opening more questions and more eyes of the people to take care about the conflict and to really understand the truth of the occupation. So in this way, we are asking even more and more Israeli to join and to be in this beside the Palestinian, in front of the racist government system against the Palestinian who are living in Palestine. So in this way, it's a good way to start to get to achieve change. For example, I would like very shortly to speak about one story about me personally, beginning with the first of this new year, 2021. One Palestinian from village next to my village, Arakiz, Harun Abu Aram, was shot by the Israeli army near his home, while the army was coming to confiscate some building materials and a generator from his house and his neighbor's house. So what was the reaction of the army? That the army shot Harun. Harun is paralyzed, and since the 1st of January is lied on the hospital and paralyzed in ICU. So his life is in danger, and there was a big Israeli movement for this case. A lot of Israeli were coming to demonstrate with the Palestinian and with Harun family against the crime that the Israeli occupation attend against Harun especially. And this create a lot of discussion, a lot of really people talking about in the Israeli street and about the reality of the occupation and how this is really on a good side in order really to make more and more people to come and to know and to really to stand up and to stand up for this situation and to change this situation. I want to go back again to this point that I was arrested because of I was like one of the organizers of this demonstration and so on. In the second time on the 8th of Friday on the 8th of January, I was arrested because, and one of the charges was I am organizing an illegal demonstration. So this is one of the charges that I was attacked with. So I was not arrested in the day of the demonstration. In the night, the Israeli army came and raided my home and arrested me and charged me with all of this and with charges attacking the Israeli soldiers, the demonstration. It was completely non-violent demonstration, including Israeli, including international, including Palestinian. So what happened is that I was arrested and I was in jail because I was demonstrating for justice for Haron, and the Israeli soldiers who shot and killed Haron are free and outside. I was in jail for 1 week, and even 5 Israeli take and went to the Israeli court and the Israeli police station to give testimony that this is what the soldiers are claiming is not true, and there was no violence against the soldier, and the soldier had no video proof of what they accused me with, and then I was in jail. So tomorrow is my hearing court for these fake charges. I want to, I'd like, the main goal is, like, this is the Israeli position and testimony with me in front of the illegal court and the illegal military court is very supportive. And I want to make sure that really, that who have to be judged tomorrow, for example, is 1st of May, my first hearing while I'm out of jail. It have to be for the Israeli soldiers and not for me. But this is very important that the Israeli continue and to really to support and stand by the Palestinian and to stop and really in order to reach the goal to fall this.
Thank you, Sami, and thank you for sharing. I know, and Abed, I want you to jump in as well, but I did want to follow up there to see, are there any articles about your friend or and about your own case that we can share with folks so that they can help distribute it and take action?
I have yeah, I have some link. I sent it to Molly. I think Molly will share it.
Okay, great. Yeah, we'll share it in the chat when we can, or also in hopefully in a follow-up email as well. It sounds like it's there. It got posted to the chat. So wonderful. Abed, do you want to jump in now?
So first of all, it's kind of hard to jump in after hearing Sami's story and the day-to-day oppression that Palestinians have to go through in the West Bank. So other than theory, there is also practice. And I think what Sami just shared with us is the importance of the practice itself. It's not enough only to talk about this. We should also think of ways to affect reality of the Palestinians, of what they have to go through. Concerning your question about the solidarity movement, I think we all underestimated how segregated the segregation wall really is. And I think when I was watching the movie of Atalya, that it's amazing that even myself, I'm a bit older than Atalya in a decade. I'm 32 years old. And it made me think, when I started my activism, I was more aware of what's happening with the Israeli Jewish activists, right? That anti-occupation and so on, Sheikh Jarrah, anarchists against the wall. And we knew each other more. And when I talked to older activists, people that were activists at the time of the first Intifada and the 80s and 90s and so on, for them, they had very close relationship with both Palestinians inside the state of Israel and Palestinians in the West Bank. And I'm talking to them, they told me we used to hang out in Tel Aviv with Palestinians that would come here from the West Bank. And the segregation, it starts as a wall, but it's more than a wall. It's a whole system that even us as activists who have the same goals. And correct me if I'm wrong, Atalya, when I was watching your movie and I was looking at the demonstration, I was like, why am I not seeing any Palestinians, even from the 48ers? They're active in the same, they have the same goals and political ideology as you are against the occupation, or sharing the same values. And unfortunately, before we talk about solidarity movement, we should talk about the segregated reality we live in, that we don't even see each other, regardless of how having the shared ideology or having the same political goals or things like that. So I think it's very important to talk about the segregation of how Israel operates on a day-to-day, how they are able to segregate us without even us noticing it. It starts with the educational system, it continues into how the military plays a role in segregation, and into the economics, like how the economic system works and day-to-day. And without addressing the core issue of the segregation, of how the logic, the ontology of the logic of the state, it will be very hard to build any solidarity. So we'll have individuals who think that what you guys are doing is great, and they might even come to the demonstration or two. But we need to talk about things that are deeper, even building friendship, of knowing each other, and acknowledging that without building this human interaction, the Israeli Zionist system wins, right? So this is my few thoughts of the solidarity movement. I think it's the things, Danny, when it comes to the relationship between both Palestinians and Israeli Jews and on the left, right? They are becoming more and more separated, and as if we don't even see our activism. And we're having a hard time to link between it. I'm sure, for example, like I believe what Atalya is doing is amazing. But I'm sure that Aliyah thinks that what the 48ers are doing in demonstration against the police violence and shooting in the Arab villages and so on also is amazing. And I think our historical role is to fight against this segregation, to try to think about ways where we challenge the system, and to talk about more about. And I think as a Palestinian, and I think unfortunately, the segregation wall doesn't only segregate between the Palestinians in the West Bank and Israelis inside the state of Israel. It's also segregated between us Palestinians from both sides of the wall. And then it's heartbreaking to see that we 48ers are not doing enough in our activism to bring more awareness about what's happening in the West Bank.
And I do want to, turn to Yael and Atalya to also, any reactions that you all have to this and thoughts. But Abed, maybe there is a question in the chat about what are 48ers that you are referring to. And so I wanted to see if you could define that term that you're using, but also talk a little bit about why are you using that term?
Okay, so 48ers are Palestinians who live in the state of Israel, and we do have a citizenship. We have individual rights, we don't have collective rights. So the state doesn't recognize that they have any Palestinian or Arab citizens. They have Jews and non-Jews. For us, the Palestinians, unfortunately, the geography of the state, from the river to the sea, is divided into 4 parts. So 67 it refers to Palestinians living under the occupation. There's 67 borders, and there's the Palestinians who live in Gaza, the siege of Gaza, and then there's the Palestinians who live in Jerusalem, and each one lives on a different bureaucratic system, right? And then there's the 48ers, which is us. And if you just take a step backward, you realize that there's a kind of hierarchy when it comes to rights. So the 48ers, they have citizenship. We have the right to vote and so on. We have individual right. In East Jerusalem, they don't have any citizenship. Then it's more complicated. In the West Bank, they're as if citizens of, and again, it's not full citizenship. Everything is under Israeli law. And in Gaza, it's it's a different system than in the 67 and the Gaza. So it's kind of complicated, and it's segregating the Palestinians from both geographically and socially from each other.
Thank you. And I'm gonna paste into the chat right in a minute, actually a link also to Visualizing Palestine that has a really great graphic on the Israeli ID system that kind of goes through some of what you just talked about. But Atalya and Yael, do you want to kind of comment on, what Sami and Abed were just speaking about, and some of the ways that solidarity as well as segregation is happening currently?
I think about the point you made regarding representation in protests. that it is one of the biggest problems that the Israeli left has, especially the Zionist left, but that doesn't stop there. It starts with Mizrahi Jews and ends with Palestinians and citizens of Gaza. And the segregation and the existence of the wall have definitely contributed to this. And I agree that a lot of times I see protests that are being organized solely by Jews or solely by citizens, and there are so many blind spots, and I have so many blind spots, and it's something that I'm kind of learning how to talk about. But one thing I really learned through my political activities regarding the occupation is that it should never be done by Jews only. I mean, dialogue is really the key. And so, yeah, I agree with the point you've made, and I agree that we should work towards changing it as a political group.
Yeah, I really agree with Yael, and I think it's really important for us to have these partnerships and to follow Palestinian leadership. So here in Jerusalem, where there are all kinds of projects, lately they've been in Isawiya, and we've been having lots of contacts with activists there and trying to bring more Israelis into the East Jerusalem neighborhoods in order to create this partnership and to show that there are people, Jewish people who want to listen to Palestinians and to support Palestinians. And I think it's something that we have to do, and I agree with Abed that it's the only way that we can move forward and create a different reality. So, yeah.
Thank you. And I really appreciate, Atalya, what you bring up around, looking to Palestinians for leadership and for, kind of helping to direct your own activism. And there's a question in the chat about, and it kind of also goes back a bit to what you were saying about segregation and how hard it is for Israelis to know what's happening or to have that interaction. And so there's a question in the chat around how difficult it was for you, Atalya, to connect with the community in the West Bank that you did, that was so kind of influential in you then deciding to refuse, as the movie shows. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about that journey and difficulties with it, but also kind of how that came about.
I don't know if I would describe it as difficult. And I think it's for me, it's a lot about community and having a community of activists that you are able to work with, to demonstrate with, to create projects with, and also to know other groups of people through. And I think when I was younger, through my brother, I got to know activists in Ta'ayush, and through knowing them, I got to know more people. And I think through expanding my own community and relationships in my activist community, I get to create more relationships in other communities. I think the most difficult part for me is that sadly I don't speak Arabic. I wish I did. I think it's one of the biggest flaws in the Israeli education, that we aren't taught how to speak Arabic. And I think it's a systematic choice to deepen the inability to talk to each other. So it's something that all Jewish Israelis suffer from, and it's like basic inability to talk. But I'm trying to learn.
I appreciate that. Certainly the language barrier creates, definitely a lot of complications in terms of actually being able to communicate with each other in a way that's meaningful and deep, and build those relationships. And I mean, Abed, you mentioned segregation and starting there. I want to come back to you to see if there's more that you want to say about that, as we are grounding this discussion. So Abed, is there more that you wanted to say kind of about segregation and in grounding this discussion before we move forward with more around, the wonderful kind of evolution of activism and solidarity?
I think that we should transcend our theories into actions. And at the end of the day, what affects reality the most is the political act itself. And it's not enough just to talk about this. It's not enough to write about this in the academia. And in the academia, you'll find amazing things, right? The action itself is super, super, super meaningful. And Italia, you mentioned the Sawiya, for example, for the Palestinians, when they see the Israelis, even if it's if it's not a mainstream movement, but even if the fact that there is even this one Israeli that is willing to come and demonstrate with us in our city, in our space, it transcends the idea of each other, of what we want from each other, and I think, we've seen it in the movie as well. Is when the Palestinians see Israelis come into action, it breaks down so many walls that, on a basic level, it humanizes us. It gives the other side the opportunity to understand. Well, not all Israelis are bad, right? And we're human, and we learn. But again, it has to be, at the end of the day, at least what I aspire to, is to translate it into a political action, and through this action to take down the walls. Not just not that I'm afraid that you guys are doing. I'm sure you guys are doing out of action, right? The whole movie is one political action. But we should focus on, and even for the people who are listening to this and they want to support, it's important to support actions, people who are on the ground, who are activists day to day, and challenge them of what do you do in order to build something better than what exists today.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think maybe we can sort of shift a little to talk a little bit more about sort of the evolving history of resistance to Israeli militarism. And Yael, maybe you could start us out by talking a little bit about that history within Israeli society, but then also talk about the most recent Shministim refusal letter that came out in January that you were a part of, and how Israeli society has responded to it currently.
Yes, so the Shministim letter is a annual or semi-annual tradition that began in 1970, 3 years after the beginning of the occupation of the West Bank. And it is a recurring format of either existing soldiers or teenagers who are supposed to enlist, that decide that they are not willing to take part in the army and in the policy that is being enforced both in Gaza and in the other occupied territories. So this year we released the latest letter in the beginning of 2021. We've spent about a year working on writing it and building a campaign around it, and finally released it in the beginning of January. The letter is available for reading both in English, Hebrew, and Arabic on our Facebook page. So a little about the letter. We basically wanted to make the reasoning for conscientious objection more widely available, especially for young Israelis who are facing enlistment. But not only, it is also, we view it as some sort of a peace offering, if you will, in a way. We wanted to show that there are young Israelis who are second guessing this reality. We're not all taking it for granted, and we're not all fine with what's going on. So the letter was kind of directed both inwards and outwards from the Israeli society. So the more local responses that we got were within the left were quite positive, even though it is a controversial stand, even within left-wing circles, because there's this kind of myth or recurring idea of changing from within. That is a sentence a lot of Zionist left-wingers like to use a lot. We should recruit and enlist so that there are good people facing Palestinians on a daily basis. And it was really important for us to channel this argument, because systematic change in a fascist reality or an apartheid reality cannot be performed by a single 18-year-old. It cannot be performed by 1,000 18-year-olds. And in fact, the reality in which we as young people are expected to take part in what we believe is unmoral and that is objectively a violation of human rights is unjust. And we want to kind of address that in a more thorough way, rather than simply pointing out specific problems with the situation in Palestine. So we wanted to give somewhat of a broader look on the issue. We were also the first letter in the history of Shministim letters to address the Nakba, and to not only talk about the 1967 injustices, but also address the very funding of Israel, and to kind of tackle that question of the legitimacy of our existence here, and also what do we do with the legacy of the Nakba and the outcomes that are still valid today, considering that we are already here. I mean, Israel is kind of hard to ignore. And it was really important for us to talk about, because it is somewhat of a taboo when talking about the occupation. It is almost always strictly 1967 forwards. So that was a bit of a controversial stand, even within the left, because a lot of people view it as delegitimizing the entire existence of Israel, or the Jewish race, because people often can tell apart between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. So yeah, we also addressed the question of gender equality and women's representation in the army, that is often perceived as a feminist stand, which we disagree with, because we don't believe that, you know, enforcing the oppression of Palestinian women can be a feminist act. And we don't think that the way to gender equality should be through militarizing our society and through violent actions. So yeah, that's basically it. We try to touch as many different topics and make it as kind of intersectional as we could, because the issue of the Palestinian people and of the Israeli occupation is way more complicated than it is often received, and it's way more nuanced, and it is so heavily embedded in our society that refusal to take part in war crimes and enforcing the violation of democracy is considered to be a way more active part than actually recruiting to it and enforcing it. So we wanted to make a statement that enlistment is no less political than refusal.
Thank you. And I think that you explained really well that this letter included a lot that previous letters did not, and really took a much more kind of political stance on a lot of issues, as you said. And I think that that's really important, and that's kind of an evolution of the refuser movement over the years, of like what you are connecting and where you're bringing it in. I do want to continue. I'm going to continue to ask these small questions to make sure that our audience knows everything you're talking about. But you use the word Nakba. And so I wonder if you or anyone else, and also panelists, certainly feel free to jump in if you want to ask questions of each other as well. You're welcome to do that. But if you wanted to say a little bit, you said you all included the Nakba in this letter. So what was included and what is the Nakba?
Maybe a Palestinian would like to answer this question.
Yeah, Abed or Sami, do you all want to talk about the Nakba, just to make sure that folks know what we're talking about? Thank you, Yael.
Okay, so if you want to translate the word Nakba, it means catastrophe. It comes to describe what happened here for the Palestinian people in 1948. So when Palestinians say Nakba, it's the catastrophe of losing our homeland, the most of the Palestinians becoming refugees either in the 67 borders of the West Bank and Gaza, or in the diaspora. So it's the catastrophe.
Thank you. And I think, for anyone else who wants to join in to talk a little bit more about how you feel that Palestinians or Israelis are kind of evolving this history of resistance against especially Israeli militarism, but even more activism in general, if there's more that you want to add to that. Anyone can go. I don't want to.
I think a very relevant point in talking about Palestinian activism or anti-militaristic activism is talking about medical apartheid and what is going on right now in a humanitarian way in Gaza regarding COVID-19. So there are a lot of details about what's going on right now with the providing of vaccines to Gaza. But in Israel and in Israeli media, it is somewhat represented as like a hostage exchange, as if the Palestinians or Gaza are supposed to give us something in order for us to provide them with vaccines that are a basic human rights. Having access to medical equipment shouldn't be a strategic tool in a war. And especially when Israel is occupying and therefore taking direct responsibility to the well-being of Palestinians. We cannot mark it as a humanitarian act. We cannot, it's not doing a favor for our neighbors. We are directly responsible for a lot of the humanitarian issues that are currently happening in Gaza. And the siege on Gaza has been around for, I think, 14 years now. So we could really see it coming. And we have a responsibility as a country, but also as a nation, I think, to stop medical apartheid.
Thank you. Abed, I saw you shaking your head a lot. So, yeah.
No, I think that what's happening with the vaccination issue is just like absurd. It's absurd how amazing this is. Just like a brief background, Israel has managed to put their hands on a big reservoirs of vaccine for many reasons, different reasons, and they've decided to after making sure that the majority of the people of the population gets the vaccinated, the first and second vaccination, they started vaccinating African refugees who live in the different Israeli cities and so on. And they were not willing to vaccinate Palestinian workers who work in Israel, which I thought was amazing. And they weren't willing to vaccinate the Palestinians, even though they work here with permits and they work in the restaurants in Tel Aviv and in Jerusalem and in construction. And the justification of it is that the PLO should buy the vaccination for them. But it was just absurd because some of them live here. Some of them have permits to literally live here and for a couple of months. And not vaccinating them puts everyone in danger, not only the Palestinians themselves, but puts also the Israelis who aren't in interaction with them. And still, any African refugees who should get vaccinated, everybody should get vaccinated, right? And have free access to vaccination. But the Palestinians are the only ones who are, the Palestinian workers with permits who live in Israel, they're the only ones who are not allowed to be vaccinated. And it's one of the most amazing things that happened. There was a text message sent by an official, a bureaucrat from the Ministry of Health that said, okay, tell the refugees and tell foreign workers they could come and vaccinate, but not Palestinians. And they sent this in a text to tell people, don't tell the Palestinian workers to come get vaccinated. And it's just mind-blowing.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think that on so many levels, the restrictions are not, focusing on Palestinians in Gaza, also in the West Bank, and also, as you said, Palestinians coming in and out and workers, is certainly a huge issue. And I know that we just put a link in the chat for a campaign that the Invest in Justice Coalition, with which both Jewish Voice for Peace and Eyewitness Palestine, along with a number of other organizations, put together, which is a demand to Congress in the US that Israel provide vaccines to all Palestinians. And not only are they, Israel, what I've been reading is that their extra ones are going to other countries right? And maybe you all know any more about that, but it's, even when there are extra vaccines, those are not going to Palestinians. Instead, the government is supplying them to allies or other countries that they see as in need. So I hope that you all can, go to that link, sign the petition as a campaign that's just getting going to Congress to try and call on that. And we have seen congressional representatives calling for that as well, including Bernie Sanders, who, specifically pointed that out as well. I guess I want to kind of shift the conversation or continue it and go back to you, Atalya, because, there was a lot of discussion around the political transformation or evolution of the Shministim letter and of, how Israelis are looking, or how many Israelis, especially on the left, are looking at what's happening today. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about, how in the film we see your family or people around you starting to move politically from learning from you and others. But maybe you could talk a little bit about how that decision has continued to kind of affect those around you, their positions, and how your kind of personal power has affected the people around you too.
It's hard to tell, but I think with the movie, we've been really, I feel like for me, this, like my objection to serve and my time in the military prison was a while ago. It was more than 3 years ago, I think almost 4 years ago now. But still, through the movie, I've had a chance to continue talking about it and continue to have a platform to speak about anti-militarization and occupation, and how, as Jewish Israelis, we have a responsibility to fight the occupation, and we have a responsibility, as Yael said, to make a choice. So I really had like the platform to talk with groups and with people all around the world and with Palestinians. I think for me, being a refuser allowed me to create different connection with Palestinians, because we have like a different starting point. So it had all types of different impact on the relationships I have around me, and also, as I've said earlier, I think it really impacted the community I have around me now, living with other activists and having it be a part of my life and of what I do. Yeah, and particularly with my family, it really changed the way they viewed their role in the occupation. I think they see, like my mother particularly sees herself much more responsible now, and she takes a lot more action. And, yeah.
Great, thank you. And I don't know, I'm curious what others think about sort of the personal impact of taking various stances or decisions and how that affects the community around you. If anyone else wants to comment on that as well. And Sami, I hope that you're still with us. I don't see you, but great, there you are.
Well, I'm still here. I wanted to start first, really about what Talia said about and about the position and that she took of the objection against the military. This is really a great choice that she did, and this is how much like as a Palestinian we appreciate that, because it is refusing to be a part of this unjust system that is practicing all kind of apartheid on the Palestinian people in the occupied territories and even in 48. So we all have like really choose a way to resist, because again I always focus on the word of change, because we resist to change to the better, and choosing a decision for resistance, that means that you have to pay also a price, or you have like there is, let's say, kind of a punishment because of the big power of the injustice power on us. So like really for all the decision for Talia took, and like that she know that she will be also in prison, I think this is like really a great also struggle inside inside Israel against serve in the military. We all يعني have also our personal stories related to the resistance. I want to speak a little bit about like one personal thing. I grew up in my family with my family. My family is refugees from 48. We go back again to the Nakba. Nakba is the catastrophe of the Palestinian people for Palestine. That is a lot of like really يعني a lot of like really first of all kicking out of Palestinian of the original Palestinian from Palestine that are refugees in all the world right now. It's also like the destruction of all Palestine and creating the state of Israel. And so this is why the Nakba, because our home was destroyed, and it's the catastrophe. As my family, when my grandmother left the village of Garitian, that is near by Beersheba, near to the south here, she moved to different places until she settled in Twani, and then my dad also was born in Twani, and we grew up here. Since the 99, according to the occupation law, there was the area 918 in the South Hebron Hills, the area where there's the Palestinians are living, is declared as a firing zone area to train the military army. So the main reason to target this area where the Palestinian villages live and where are spread, in order really to find an excuse to evict the Palestinian from these places. And as well, according to Oslo Accord, this area is considered as well Area C, that is under the Israeli military control. So in the 99, really, it was completely forcible transfer for the Palestinians who are living in the South Hebron Hills area inside the zone 918, that's considered, or what they call it, the Israeli army. Since that time, there was the Israeli coming to support, to be beside the Palestinian, and in order to work in the legal side and also in the immediate side in order to bring back the Palestinian to their land. It was not easy, for example, that some Israeli come and say that, yeah, we want to help you, and we know that the Israeli are the people who are evicting us from our land. So it was really a big mess since the beginning, and until really slowly there was kind of a deal of trust in the beginning to work with Palestinian and Israeli together to bring to kind of achieve a military court, from the military court a decision that the Palestinians are allowed to go back to their land and to their villages. Anyway, the Palestinians in the end were back with a lot of struggle and a lot of work to their villages and to their homes. But until today, there is the military training going on in these villages as another way of creating a weather of trauma and a weather of noisy that the Palestinians are really obliged to kind of create this weather of very hard life, noisy, boring, and really tired, full of everyday shooting by the guns, raiding the villages in the night, all of this military training, and at some point that the Palestinian will just leave the place and go. The main goal of the occupation is the land, but the land without people, the land without Palestinians. So we understand this, and this is the main title of the non-violent resistance in the South Hebron Hills, that is the existence is resistance. Existence is resistance despite of all the occupation policy and that's going on here. You guys mentioned before about, yeah, you are not allowed to have access to water. That means that because also water is main resource of life that you need to, that you the only way to live with is with water, I mean, the main thing. So you are not allowed to have access to water. You're not allowed to have access to electricity, no roads, no homes, no home building. For example, one of our, most of the area of South Hebron Hills, people are living in the tents and in the caves in this century because of any houses will be built is demolished. And we are all the time, the people are challenging the occupation because this is our land. There is the people we build and we challenge the occupation, but all the time, each week we have a demolishing operation that's happening in the area of the South Hebron Hills in different villages. as I said before, this is the goal of the occupation, is to evict all the Palestinians from here. But our existence is the most important thing, and always that we believe that the Israeli occupation is pulling us always to the circle of the violent in order to have an excuse, for example, to shoot and to kill us or to put us all long time in jail. So this is the effective choice of choosing, protesting, rejecting the occupation in a non-violent way, in order that since you are outside the jail, you are more, and to think in the long time how much you can be affected affected, and to really to continue to resist, and in order really at the end of the day to achieve the main goal, and it is the end of the occupation, and also with the supporter from international supporters, and even from the even the Israeli leftists who are rejecting also this whole occupation system.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think that you bring up so many of the deep issues that are facing so many Palestinians, especially in areas like Atwani and others in the West Bank too. And I think where you end is a good place for us to kind of move and thinking about, you know, what is the vision for the future? Partially because I've heard you talk about it before, but Abed, I wanted to turn to you and say, you know, what is your vision of the future that you want to see for Palestinians, for Palestine, for Israel, and what steps do you think young Palestinians and Israelis can make to push for that future, and the work that you've been doing to do that?
Okay, so I'll start by saying that I don't have this one state, two state solution, and I think it's not healthy for the discussion to imagine that if we just draw a border and say this group lives here and the other group lives there, it would solve everything. And I don't mind having one state, two state, 5 states, 20 state solution. I think that's not important. What's important is that we should start talking about an end game, a shared vision of how do we see and what we can agree on. Because one of the problems that we're seeing, even between Palestinians and Israeli left, that might agree on some things, but it's a very difficult issue when it comes to what's our end game, what's our shared vision. So if we take, for example, in South Africa, there is this one man, one vote, right? That people agreed upon that this is where we should aspire, a state that is democratic and everybody could vote. And you can see in different struggles around the world that both sides could somehow reach this common end game. And unfortunately here we're not seeing an end game, even from both peace sides, from both sides that aspire for a more peaceful solution. And I'll be very honest, I don't see an end game that talks about a Jewish state as my goal. I don't aspire to live in a Jewish state. I, for example, aspire to live in a state for all its citizens that takes into consideration both Palestinians and both Jews that live here. And we have this moral obligation of building a system that recognizes both groups of people and aspires to build something better than what exists. Will it be perfect? Of course not. Would everybody be happy? Of course not. And it doesn't work this way. Nobody's happy. Like everybody's demonstrating all around the world. But at least we have something to aspire for, something to imagine. It's like when we go to sleep, we know that we want this. And my political goal is to start there. How do we build this shared vision? Where do we want? And it should be fair for both sides. And unless we agree on that, we're going to stay segregated because both end games are significantly different from each other. But it's like, at the end of the day, our role as political activists is also to be optimistic and to continue. And I think, Atalya, you're doing an excellent job, and Yael and all you guys, it's not easy to go against mainstream. And people don't tend to fight against the consensus, especially in your age and You know, it's like there's a saying in Arabic that goes like "حط راسك بين هالروس" and "صرخ يا الطيروس." Put your head between all these head and shout "head the slayer," something like that. But people do take difficult choices, and they inspire us, and they're the people that make history. And I think the next stage, if we want to transcend this conflict, we should talk about how we can agree on in our imagination of something that both sides could accept as a sort of solution.
Thank you. I think that you really have a wonderful way of thinking creatively and imagining. And I think that idea of imagining is something that a lot of us lose when we're in the trenches or in the, you know, in everything that's going on in this world, especially these days with the pandemic and things like that. It's hard to imagine. And I really love that plays a key role in your vision. I want to see Yael and Atalya, if you want to comment more on a vision for the future, but also how you see the international community supporting young folks, supporting young people who are being imprisoned by the Israeli government, you know, and a vision in your vision for the future as well.
I think in regards to imagining the future, it is one of the biggest challenges for Israeli activists, for left-wing activists here, because I think our government, who is absolutely corrupt and wrongdoing in every way, the true policy of the Israeli government in past 2 decades or more has been kind of sustaining a conflict. It's not necessarily improving, or is it drastically getting worse, as much as it is kind of a monotone maintenance of this conflict. And it is done for, I think, a few reasons. First, the Israeli government has found a way to make profit out of this conflict. And this profit is being done in a few ways. It's being done through the exploitation of Palestinian workers in Israel, who are, because of their difficult backgrounds, are completely, all of their rights are taken away from them, because they're in such a vulnerable position to begin with. It is being done through the Israeli weapon industry and overall security industry. It is being done through the use of our taxpayers' money to strengthen the settlements industry. But mostly it is, I think the main reason this conflict is being so carefully sustained is because it kind of helps maintain this idea of Israel is an island surrounded by enemies, and that we're in a constant survivalist stand. And I think because we are being told that we're so in such a sensitive point, or that we're in constant need of survival, then we kind of look over or approve of a lot of moral injustices, saying we have no other option. And I think we definitely have another option. It is just not being presented as one. And the thought of living in a different reality is kind of, you need to go to bend back. So like, it's so hard to actually picture a realistic, better, just future. And a lot of the comments we received regarding our letter was, okay, so what's your alternative? What's your security plan? And we're not government officials. We're not in the army. We're not in any official stand to say or to build a strategic plan for Israel in the future. We are a group of young people who are living here, who are seeing the daily influences of the heavy presence of military in our society. And we understand that we are being mistreated and that Palestinians are being mistreated through us. And we don't have the time to make this really detailed strategic plan when we are being asked at 18 to already take part of its violation. So while I think this question of what future do you see is interesting and I understand where it's coming from, I think the focus around it in conversation with activists is a bit of mistreatment, because it's not our responsibility to tell the government what to do necessarily, or to spell it out for them. It is our responsibility to not enforce its policy that we see as unjust.
I would like to add a small thing. I think it's also our responsibility to go against the policies that we see and as unjust, and to speak out and to spread our messages. So I would like to invite everyone to sign the OBJECTOR Solidarity letter. It's here in the chat. Yeah, thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you so much. And, thank you to all of you for sharing your visions of what you want, to be fighting for, which I think is really what is important. And the work that you all are doing is just so important and necessary at this moment, at every moment. And so I feel lucky that there are young folks, and I can say that because I am older than all of you. So I can say that, who are continuing to push and to fight for justice and to fight for freedom for everyone. And, as we kind of close out, I know there are a lot of questions about how can we support, and there are lots of ways that you can support. Certainly, Atalya, thank you for bringing up the solidarity letter, which is in the chat. And certainly we also want to talk about supporting the work of the groups who are co-sponsoring this. And so both Jewish Voice for Peace and Eyewitness Palestine, as I mentioned before, are part of this Invest in Justice coalition. That's a coalition of a number of organizations that's been working really hard on a number of campaigns, one of which was just launched really this past week. And last week, a petition with 54,000 plus names were delivered to Facebook offices and in 17 different cities around the country, with a message saying, Facebook, do not add Zionist as a protected category in your hate speech policy. And so it was a coalition of 40 plus groups that signed on to this, and now all of these individuals as well. And even as soon as this week, in the next few days, Facebook is supposed to be putting out a decision on this proposed policy change. And what this means is it could say anyone who is speaking out against Zionism or, the crimes that the Israeli government are committing could be viewed as hate speech and shut down on Facebook. And already Palestine organizing groups, even like Eyewitness Palestine and JVP, have been targeted and kind of silenced in ways. We get messages all the time saying we're violating Facebook policies, which nothing that we do is violating any policies that I understand. So we certainly want to keep the pressure up on that over the next few days. And so in the chat, you'll see this link to the petition where you can sign that. And you can send email messages directly to Facebook next week. So keep an eye out for some more information around that. And then also going back to the medical apartheid that we talked about with the COVID vaccines. There's also a petition that this coalition started to tell your Congress, as I said, that they should speak out. So you can sign that petition. You can share the petition with your own email lists and networks, and on your social media for sure, and make sure that that is also signed. And then specifically around Eyewitness Palestine, our history in the movement, we've been here for 20 years now, is running delegations to Palestine. So exposing people to that reality, breaking down those barriers so that Americans also are exposed to what is really happening there. And during COVID and during the pandemic, our delegations for the first time in 20 years have had to stop. And so we've moved to a new platform and utilizing Zoom to do virtual delegations. And every month we're visiting 1 or 2 different places that you can join in small sessions. So unlike this, where there are over 100 people, the sessions have only about 40 or 50 people, and you can talk directly with your videos on with our hosts. And so this spring, we're planning visits to the Tent of Nations, the Silwan neighborhood of Jerusalem, Lifta, Rafah refugee camp in Gaza, and also 2 focused delegations, one on IDF refusal with Miss Our Vote, and another around child detention with Defense for Children International Palestine. So you can find out more about those, as well as see some of our past virtual delegations. And Abed showed us around his hometown of Yafa earlier this year, or later last year, I guess. So you can go, and the video of the tour that he gave is also up there on the virtual delegation site. So we do hope that you guys will join us to go, especially with the Masar Vote one, which we're organizing, to go even more deeply into these issues. And I know a lot of the questions that were very specific around refusals we didn't get to yet, but hopefully we could get to in those conversations. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to Shalva and Molly to talk a little bit about the OBJECTOR Impact Project.
Thanks, Emily. And yeah, huge thank you to Sami and Abed and Yael and Atalya for all of your tireless organizing work and for sharing your time with us today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the OBJECTOR Impact Project, which is an effort to facilitate engagement with the film's themes of conscientious objection, feminism, anti-militarism, all the stuff we talked about today. We're doing a lot of outreach to youth movements, community organizations, schools, congregations, etc., to try to screen the film and have panels like this one, as well as smaller group discussions with a wide array of audiences. So if you would like to participate in one of those or host one of those, please reach out. We have a discussion guide that's designed to deepen conversations about the documentary and also people's own experiences and expanding viewpoints after seeing the film. And our main focus is in contributing to this culture shift in Israel and in the US, but we're also collaborating with organizations all around the world. So please reach out through our website, or you can email at info@objectorfilm.com. And we would love to collaborate with you if you have a group that you would like to discuss the film with. And yeah, as Abed said, we have to focus on action, right? So there's 3 things you can do right now to support the work of these panelists. First, as Atalya said, please sign the OBJECTOR Solidarity Letter. It's on the OBJECTOR Film website. Please share it around. And if you're able, please make a donation to any of the groups that are being repped here: Eyewitness, JVP, Youth of Samud, Mesarvot, and OBJECTOR Impact Project. You can find links to donate on any of our websites. And then if you're not already organized in a group like JVP or Eyewitness, please find out a way to start organizing with a community wherever you are. And we have a list of lots of different groups and opportunities to take action on our website, objectorfilm.com. So thank you so much for being with us today. And I will turn it back over to Emily.
Thank you so much. And also I want to echo thanks to Sami and Abed and Atalya and Yael for really this wonderful conversation. And you know, connecting with you all is definitely one of the highlights of my job, that I get to you know, be in conversation with you all. And I look forward to many more conversations to come. And I hope that those who are here, you know, listening today are bringing back new snippets of information that maybe they didn't know before, and will continue to look into these issues around Israeli militarization and activism moving forward. So thank you all for joining us today, and look forward to conversations to come. Thank you.